Now on Indianapolis This Week, offering pre-K to every Indiana 4-year-old. Democratic candidate John Gregg answers questions about how exactly the state can afford it. Looking for an alternative to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. We talked to the head of Indiana's Libertarian Party and the new debate over gun control after the Orlando massacre. Will anything really be different when the Senate votes on Monday?
From RTV6, Indianapolis This Week.
Thank you so much for joining us here on this Father's Day. Another extraordinary week. We start by talking specifics about pre-K education for thousands of Hoosier children. Democrats John Gregg and Glenda Ritz spelling out their plan for statewide pre-K for every Hoosier 4-year-old. We talked to the superintendent about it here last Sunday. The duo says the state can expand the current pre-K program using existing state funds. Exactly how will they do it? Our Katie Hines sat down with John Gregg to ask that question.
All right, John, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. What is the need for publicly funded pre-K statewide?
You know, it does so many things. It has short-term advantages and long-term advantages. If you see and talk with board members and in the boardrooms of Indiana's larger employers at Cummins, at Lilly, modern tech companies like Salesforce, down to those entrepreneurs, and when you talk with educators and academics, all you hear is we have to have pre-kindergarten, which is 4-year-olds in Indiana. It cuts down on the number of remediations they have to do going into kindergarten to first grade. It keeps the children stimulated. It also cuts down long-term on jail rates, drug usages, the number of children that have preschool, the pre-kindergarten. You can see a direct correlation to the number of them out of high school that get certification, get a 2-year degree or get a 4-year degree. And so it has a financial impact. But that's why I think the Indiana Chamber of Commerce names it as one of their most important things that they want to see the legislature to do. That's why we've spent hours looking at the budget to come up with a way that we can fully fund it.
Do you think that funding is sustainable given the lofty goals you have for this program? Absolutely,
it is, because we have got the money from looking at number one. We already have a small amount that is set for kindergarten from the On My Way pre-K, but we also have remediation dollars. All of those monies add up to about $70+ million in those existing dollars in remediation. Then we have gone over the budget, and that's what a leader does. We find what we call reversions. These reversions are dollars that are not spent by the agency. These are dollars that are there. They're not surplus dollars in the sense when people think we're getting into the surplus. This is money that's been appropriated that these agencies just did not need, did not spend for one reason or another, and will not. That's an enormous amount of money that is out there, over $50 million there in that category alone. We are not cutting any, we're not cutting to do away with any of these existing programs. Then there's also a third category, which is, I kind of call it in some manners, wasteful spending, but it's the old I-STEP test, and it's other duplicative, that's a hard word for me to say, duplicative tests that we do, like we test third graders reading in addition to I-STEP. That's a couple $2 million. But when you start looking and adding all these up, you come up with over $240 million. That does include monies from the federal government that are our tax dollars that the governor turned down. We're not going to turn that money down. We know we can get it. But in a worst case scenario, if we couldn't, the money's still there to do it, and it is sustainable.
How do you sell the plan to Republicans who say that expansion should happen, but specifically for low-income kids?
You know, I think that's wrong. I've served in the General Assembly, granted many years ago, since I'm not a career politician, but I think that this is a case where I know the legislature, and I don't want this to be viewed as just another social program or what people call another welfare program. This is needed by all 4-year-old kids, regardless of their background or their income. and we've got the money. I'm running to be CEO of the largest corporation in the state of Indiana. The state of Indiana itself, it's got 6.5 million shareholders, and I can't think of a better place to put some of our excess dollars than in education in preschool. We can. It's a matter of prioritizing and refocusing. We'll work with our Republican friends in the legislature. We'll get it done. It doesn't happen overnight. Our goal is a 4-year phase-in because these are quality programs. They have to meet certain criteria, and this is not babysitting. These are quality programs that have to be taught by people with certain skills.
Level 3 and level 4.
Level 3 and level 4.
And I know pre-K is part of your economic growth plan that you unveiled here in recent days. You also talked about repealing the Religious Freedom Act. How do you go about doing that? What's the need for that?
You know, as I travel around the state, when people want to talk about the economy, but right after that, they always mention the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that image that Indiana has got, that we are a people that foster discrimination and aren't welcoming. That has had a huge toll on our reputation. It's had a huge economic toll. It hurts us in attracting and retaining talent. It hurts us in attracting new businesses. And one of the things we want to do is let people know that we are a welcoming state. And that's why I've said on the first day that I intend to sign an executive order for the members of the LGBT community that work for the state of Indiana, some of those 30,000+ employees that are LGBT, to give them that civil rights protection. But also we want to make sure that the businesses that the state of Indiana is doing business with also grant civil rights protection to that group of individuals. This is the #1 goal of the State Chamber of Commerce. It is not just a civil rights issue. It's just not a human dignity issue. It's also an economic issue. And we're going to get it done. We lead by example.
In Congress, U.S. Senate Democrats have revived the debate over gun control in wake of the Orlando shootings. Do you think it's time now to revisit the federal gun laws, the state's gun laws?
My position on guns is well known, and you know, I am a gun owner. I like to think of myself as a responsible gun owner. So I'll be anxious to see what the federal government's doing.
John, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Mike Pence's campaign responded on pre-K, saying the governor is proud to be the state's first governor to successfully shepherd pre-K through the General Assembly. The campaign also saying Governor Pence is committed to expanding Indiana's program to serve more children in need while ensuring the state can afford pre-K into the years to come. Coming up, the two presidential candidates the most disliked for the two major parties in modern history. So can the Libertarians turn that into success? The head of Indiana's Libertarian Party joins us here next. You're watching Indianapolis This Week, only on RTV6. And welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. They have the highest unfavorables of two presumptive nominees in history. A new ABC News Washington Post poll this week showing 70% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump, 55% thinking the same about Hillary Clinton right now. Enter the Libertarian Party and Gary Johnson, now trying to ride that wave to an upset come November. And we want to welcome in Joe Hauptman, the chairman of the Indiana Libertarian Party. Joe, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Good to see you. For those who don't know, in 30 seconds or less, tell me about the Libertarians.
Well, Libertarians basically believe in live and let live. We believe that you have the moral right to live your life as you choose, as long as you're not interfering with other people doing the same. So we don't have to approve of what you do. We just figure it's none of our business. And you don't have to approve of us. We figure it's none of yours.
Let's start talking about the party in the context of the presidential race right now. Tell me about Gary Johnson. Why do you think he should be the next president of the United States?
Well, one of those three people will be president in next January. And I would say just picture in the White House all three. And I suggest you Google Gary Johnson. Gary is a two-time Republican governor in a Democrat state. Re-elected the second time with more votes than the first. He was known at the time as Governor Veto because he vetoed more bills than all of the other governors in the country combined during the same period. His running mate is Governor Wells, who was a Republican governor of Massachusetts, not exactly known as a conservative state, and again re-elected with more votes than he had originally. We are basically the adults in the room this election.
Talk about that a little bit. Talk about potentially being a spoiler in this. When you put Gary Johnson into the polls right now, he is polling, if you have all three candidates, at around 10 or 11%. You have to be licking your lips at the unfavorables for Clinton and Trump.
Yeah, this is not a traditional libertarian campaign, which is often about showing people that there's another way to govern. I look at this election, quite frankly, as giving people an exit ramp from a disaster that's waiting to happen. No matter who of the major parties wins, if that is what happens, at least over half of the country is going to be very, very disgusted. We believe Gary Johnson is the rational compromise in the sense that he wants to make government smaller. He wants to get it out of our lives, but he has experience. Between the two of them, they've got 16 years of executive experience, which is more than, regardless of who they get as vice president, either team will have.
When you put Gary Johnson into the poll right now, and if he indeed is polling at around 10 or 11%, where are those voters coming from? The ones that are coming to the Libertarian Party now? Is it more Republicans? Is it more Democrats? Who's finding the Libertarians?
At this point, we're pulling almost equally. The last poll I saw had us pulling 6% for the Democrats and 5% for the Republicans. That may change after the nominations are actually solidified. What it boils down to is if you are more worried about government being involved in economics, the incredible debt we have, the unsustainable size of government, then you're most likely to come to us from the Republicans. If you're worried about the absolute loss of a human rights movement in this country, the absolute loss of an anti-war movement in this country, you're more likely to come to us from the Democrat. And our position is we're consistent on all. Basically, we're saying minimum government, live your life as you can, don't get involved in foreign wars, defend yourself, but there's a difference between self-defense and going over and beating up your neighbor because you don't like him.
Some pundits looking at these polls so far have said that Johnson could actually perform better than Ross Perot did, than a Ralph Nader did. There's got to be a trickle-down impact on the interest level in libertarians here on the state and local level as well. Are you seeing that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Traditionally, the president is our lowest vote total. We got around 1.2% for president last time, and Rupert got about 4% for governor. This is probably the first election where the presidential candidate for the Libertarians may actually have coattails.
If you get enough of a bounce into November, if you don't win the presidency, as that is not expected, can you keep the momentum going past this election? Can this be a big enough election for you?
Oh, we'll keep momentum going. Now, I don't expect if we don't win that the next time around we'll do as well, but I suspect we will do order of magnitude better than we did before. People, for the first time, for many people, are looking at us as a choice. All of my life, and I'm in my 60s, it's been choosing the lesser of two evils. This year, most people are looking at the lesser of two disasters. And as a result, they are seriously looking, do we have to go somewhere else? And the Libertarian Party is one of the best choices for that somewhere else.
We'll see what happens in the run-up to November. Joe Hauptman, chair of the Indiana Libertarian Party. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. And coming up, the Senate showdown over new gun control measures after the massacre in Orlando. Will Monday's vote be any different from the others? Our insiders are standing by to debate that here next. You're watching Indianapolis This Week on RTV6.
Those who defend the easy accessibility of assault weapons should meet these families and explain why that makes sense.
President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden in Orlando this week, meeting with the families of the Orlando nightclub attack and making a strong new push for gun control measures, including banning those on the terror watch list from actually buying guns. We want to welcome in our political insiders here on this Father's Day. Mary Beth Schneider, great to see you as always. Pete Seat for the Republicans, Adam Kirsch for the Democrats. The Senate is set to vote Monday on new gun control measures. That, of course, comes after Wednesday's 15-hour-long filibuster by Senate Democrats led by Connecticut's Chris Murphy, demanding a vote after the attack in Orlando. Among the senators joining that filibuster, Indiana Democrat Joe Donnelly. Donnelly says he's a supporter of the Second Amendment, but that it's time for the Senate to do its job by expanding background checks to all gun sales and ban gun sales to anyone on that no-fly list.
This is simple American common sense. This is what the American people expect of us. This is what we were elected to do. If a person is on a terrorist watch list, they shouldn't be able to buy a gun. It is that simple and that uncomplicated.
Senator Dan Coates' office told us he is working with his colleagues to craft legislation that would prevent known or suspected terrorists from purchasing firearms while preserving due process to protect the fundamental Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. So that's where we are going into tomorrow. Does anything get done, Mary Beth?
I think there's a good chance the Senate will pass something. It may be on the weaker side. It may be more what John Cornyn has proposed, where you would have to show probable cause, which is a pretty high standard. If you could show probable cause, you could probably arrest the guy and not just stop him from buying a gun. But then it goes to the House, and I think there's the chances of it passing the House are diminished.
Adam, have Democrats made a strong enough case?
I think Democrats have made a strong enough case. I mean, banning people who are on the terrorist watch list from buying assault weapons should be a very easy vote. Unfortunately, Todd Young's voted repeatedly against it. Senator Coates has voted against it. The only way to change this vote from the previous iterations is to put more Democrats in Congress.
Pete, what happens?
I think Senator Coates pinpointed it very well, which is it's this struggle and this balance between what people want to do and the height of their emotion after an attack like happened in Orlando, and balancing that with the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And people who have firearms at home see this and are concerned that they're somehow going to be punished if this goes too far for being a law-abiding gun owner. But obviously, Rahm Emanuel said, "Don't let a crisis go to waste," and that seems to be exactly what Congress is trying to do: take advantage of the movement to get something through.
But at the same time, you see an overwhelming majority of Americans, a majority of NRA members, a majority of gun owners support closing the gun show loophole and banning people on the terrorist watch list from buying firearms. Those are, I mean, Senator Donnelly has it right. Those are common sense, easy votes that Republicans are refusing to put up.
We have 5 months left to the election. How much is that impacting all of this right now?
Well, that impacts everything right now. And complicating things is Donald Trump saying he's talking to the NRA. Who knows what's going to come out of that, if anything. And but you also have a extremely full-throated call for gun control from the Democratic Party this year, led by Hillary Clinton. However, if you didn't have little children being murdered in Sandy Hook being enough to pass some of this, I'm not sure that 49 people in Orlando will do it either.
And I would say, I think it's unfair to paint with a broad brush Republicans are stopping this. There are plenty of Democrats who feel the same way as well. It just depends on where you're from. You mentioned the House, the way these districts are drawn. People are from places where a lot of folks are law-abiding gun owners, and they hear from their constituents, and they're worried about passing legislation like this that could, it's a slippery slope. Everything is in Washington, and I think that's where the concern is, and there are plenty of Democrats who feel that way too.
Well, there are a lot of people concerned about that due process aspect of all this, because being on that terror watch list, you haven't been tried for anything yet. So there's that give and take. If this is not an election year, is this easier to get through Congress right now, Pete?
I think every year in the mind of Congress is an election year, and we're at this point with the way partisanship is, and that people have gone to their corners, that it makes anything controversial hard to get through.
I think it makes it actually harder if it's not an election year, because right now, if you're in a district where you're getting feedback from your constituents saying do this, you are far more likely to pay attention to that. But you're right about it really does depend on the district. And the Senate, you have more vulnerable Republicans up than you have vulnerable Democrats. And that's why I think it could pass the Senate. I just don't see right now it getting to the House.
That segues into our next topic as we talk about vulnerable Republicans right now. Former President George W. Bush out campaigning. Donald Trump, of course, campaigning for himself. It does not appear that he's campaigning for fellow Republicans right now. You've got kind of a disjoint in that Republican Party. Pete, you're our Republican insider. Let's get inside it. What's happening right now?
It's mass chaos. That's what's happening.
Game, set, match. That's all we had to say.
Quotes, mass chaos. I'm sure there are some Republicans who would be happy to have Donald Trump campaign for them, and there are some Republicans who would rather he go to another country because they don't want to have anything to do with him. I think the George W. Bush news is intriguing, considering that he really swore off politics. I mean, he came out of the shadows, politically speaking, to do one event for his brother, Jeb Bush, and that was just days before Jeb's campaign ended. So it's intriguing that he is coming out and getting involved in the political process at this point.
Adam, Donald Trump is going to these states to raise money now. He's not campaigning in these swing states. How big of an advantage does that give Hillary Clinton?
I think Hillary Clinton's already at a pretty big advantage. I mean, this is the second summer of Trump now, to go back almost a year on this program. And Donald Trump is a toxic figure. I mean, 70% of Americans view him unfavorably. It is unquestionably the highest ever. The second, quite frankly, is Hillary Clinton at 55. And Trump is at a disadvantage because he's so noxious. He's a racist. He's a bigot. He is offensive to whole swaths of Americans. And quite frankly, it's very troubling to see Mike Pence say at the Republican convention last week that Indiana should be the first state on the board for Donald Trump, instead of saying, what many Republicans have said is this is offensive.
Mary Beth gets the last word on this Father's Day.
I would love to know whether Donald Trump would Mike Pence want Donald Trump to come in and campaign for him in Indiana. I think that would be fascinating. Here's a guy, he endorsed him after Cruz, but then, stood up at the convention and said, we have to be the first state on the board for Donald Trump. He's in a close election himself. Does he want Donald Trump in Indiana?
We will see what happens. Adam, Pete, Mary Beth, thank you so much for being here. Join us right now on Twitter and Facebook as well at Indy This Week. We'll be right back here on Indianapolis This Week.